Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Northside Nine on 4-Star Chicago Sports. Per usual, I got my boy Kyle Duplessis in the house. We got a packed show for you today. How you doing, Kyle? I know it was a late night.
Yeah, Sean, I don't know if I'm considering it a late night anymore. At this point, it's more like an early morning. I mean, I get home by the time you're probably waking up, right? So
I was working on the show at 6, but I did see your text at 3 o'clock in the morning on, I can't remember what you texted out.
Nikola Jokic had the first 30-20-20 game in NBA history last night. So yeah, quite the spectacle.
Holy Jokic, as you would say. What's going on at Mass? Morning to you too, brother. Thanks for spending a few minutes with us early in the morning. Let's get into this as the Cubs did take a couple of nosedives this week after starting off undefeated, but we don't really care about the record. So let's get into the news and notes of the week. Mr. Nico Hoerner did field and take some batting practice this week, although the thought of him going to Japan seems to be disappearing from the Cubs' brains at the moment. Another guy who we stated last week would most likely not make the trip across the country, Mr. Matthew Shaw. He did field, he took live batting practice, and actually got into a couple of games. The Cubs have not made an official decision on whether he will be in Japan. They do have to make that decision pretty shortly, so we will be finding out on the status of Mr. Matthew Shaw. Also, the Cubs are set to add Brad Keller to their major league roster rather than losing him on his minor league contract opt-out clause per team reports. A couple of other guys that were opted out. My boy and a guy who I hope fully does return from his 2022 elbow Tommy John surgery. He missed the entire 2023 season. He did make a full recovery and pitch in 2024. Came up with the Cubs came into the Cubs bullpen late in the season. He posted a 371 earned run average with a 154 whip, 26 strikeouts, 10 Ks, over 26.2 innings. And Mr. Ethan Roberts will kick off the 2025 season back at AAA. Another gentleman that was sent down to AAA this week was Luke Little. He is still recovering from a lat surgery, so his spring has been very, very minimal. His big league readiness, to me, remains up in the air. He did deliver a 346 earned run average, 28 strikeouts, and 18 Ks over 26 relief innings for the Chicago Cubs last year. Also, a few other guys that were kicked down to the minor leagues. Phil Bickford, Chris Flexen, Ben Heller, Trevor Richards, Jonathan Long, who was competing for an extra infield spot as a utility man for the Cubs. Cubs prospect James Triantos, Greg Allen, and Christopher Franklin all rejoined the minor league camp this week. Kyle, do any of those guys concern you not being on the club this morning? Or moving forward, I should say.
No, not particularly, Sean. I mean, it'd be nice to have Luke Little when he's at his best and contributing to this bullpen. But with all the ups and downs last season and the injury, I'm not surprised that they're going to start him down there. I would expect to see him at some point this season, though, for sure.
Yeah, I would too. Hopefully he can get that fastball under control. Even though he didn't walk many, he still got us in some situations. So let's see. Let's get into this week. On Sunday, we were with you on Saturday, a guy who I'm concerned, and we're going to talk about this rotation in just a little bit, but Mr. Matthew Boyd allowed 3 runs on 4 hits and a walk across 2 1/3 innings in Sunday's Cactus League game against the Reds. He did strike out 4 after a scoreless spring debut covering 2 innings. Boyd's was less effective, as you can see in his second appearance. The veteran did rack up some strikeouts, though. As I said, he did get 4 strikeouts in that performance. The Cubs then lost their second game in a row on Monday, losing to the Diamondbacks. Caleb Killian, who's given up 8 runs and a couple of walks over 3 2/3 innings during spring training, is a guy left off the list, but the Cubs have opted him back to AAA. Not only is he back to AAA, he's also running out of options. He may be a guy that the Cubs end up ultimately losing who has not worked out. Another gentleman who had a nice performance this week was Nate Pearson. He has a lively arsenal And he threw significantly more strikes last year upon joining the Chicago Cubs, and he has done well through the Cactus League so far this year. A guy who did not do so well in that game was Tyson Miller. He gave up 5 hits, 4 runs, 4 earned, two strikeouts. Miller was an effective part of the Cubs' 2024 bullpen, posting a 215 earned run average, over 50 relief innings. So he figures to hopefully still have a key role, but again, the addition of some competition like Ryan Brazier, Eli Morgan, and Ryan Presley, and the development of one Porter Hodge may see Miller in some less higher leverage situations than he did in 2025. Any thoughts on those guys and where they're at going into the spring, Kyle, or coming through the spring?
Like I said, we talked about this last week, Sean. The spring training is just really, really tough to judge or critique.
Correct.
Because these guys, a lot of these pitchers are working on new pitches or maybe working on it from a different spot on the mound. It's just they're all just kind of tweaking their expertise right now, and obviously some of it, Sean, is not going to end up very well. These guys are getting beat up. You could say that about almost every pitcher in baseball. The Cubs have been, as you mentioned earlier, Sean, the Cubs offense has been on fire. They've been beating every single pitcher they've seen. This is just a start of spring training. This is how it is. We always see this every single year. Every year people talk about it, make a big deal about it, and then you get into the regular season and you see a totally different player. I do expect, though, that Tyson Miller would be in less high leverage situations anyway, Sean, considering the moves they've made. Yeah. When he was traded for, he was kind of a middle of the road relief pitcher. I expect him to continue to be that, and I'd like to see him more in games where the Cubs have a 4 or 5 run lead, or maybe they're getting blown out, something like that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, Sean, you don't want Tyson Miller to be one of those 7, 8, 9 guys in high leverage games. Those games that are close games and it's maybe a 1-score game. You'd like to see like a rotation of Presley, Morgan, and Hodge, or in no particular order, but you'd like to see like a shutdown bullpen when in those close 1-run games. So I like Tyson Miller. I think he's going to be a contributor for this team. I'm not really concerned about it. I'll be concerned about it once the regular season starts.
Okay, and then moving on to Wednesday's game. This was the fun game, and I know, Kyle, you got to check this out a little bit. Shota Imanaga, 4 innings, pitched 4 innings, struck out 3, and induced a lot of swing and misses as he tunes up for his Game 1 start in Japan. That ball game, the Cubs blew out the Reds, but the good things that came out of that, Morgan, Brazier, and Merriweather all looked well. They pitched well, and combined for 3 innings, 1 hit, 1 walk, and 5 strikeouts. The 1 run in this game was given up by Porter Hodge. He pitched 1 inning, gave up 2 hits, a walk, struck out 1. Shaw and Amaya in that game were both 2 for 3 as Shaw continues to recover from his injury. Anything on Shota? I'm very happy because Shota looked really sharp in this start against the Padres, and he's going to have to be very sharp against $1 billion Dodgers in 10 days from now. Any thoughts on Shota before we get into Thursday's game?
It's great to see. Like I said, once again, spring training. So I'm not going to take too much. The guys he was pitching against probably won't be playing in the major league start the season. But I mean, Sean, it's definitely good to see him have a game like that rather than the opposite, right? And have to give up 3 or 4 home runs. I'm still worried about Shota. I think ultimately that fly ball at Wrigley Field is going to start to hurt him. It's probably going to hurt him a little more than it did last season. I expect to see some regression. But man, Sean, if Shota can pitch to his sub-3 ERA again, that answers a lot of the questions the Cubs fans are asking right now. I mean, is he a true number 2? Do the Cubs have 2 dominant pitchers in their lineup? If Shota can just pick up where he left off last season, and the answer is yes, they do. But like I said, Sean, like we've talked about this before on this podcast, go back to his major league debut when the wind was blowing in, and I think 4 or 5 of those balls, if the wind was blowing out, are probably home runs. So he needs definitely something he needs to work on. I still like the strikeout numbers. I think he's always going to be a high strikeout guy. He's probably the Cubs' second best pitcher going into this season. So they definitely need him to have a season very similar to last year.
I agree with that, and hopefully he can, because he will be a significant part if the Cubs plan to play deep into October. Moving on to Thursday really quick, the Cubs lost 9-3 to the Royals. Ben Brown got the start for Justin Steele, who had to be who just missed the start because of the flu. Doesn't look like he's going to be missing too much time, just recovering from that. But Ben Brown allowed 3 runs on 4 hits across 3 2/3 innings against the Royals. He did strike out 5. Brown, it did come out this week that the Cubs at this moment, and this could change over the next couple of weeks, are stretching him out and expecting him to compete for a starting rotation spot. They said they will not be putting him into the bullpen as of right now. So far in 8 innings in Cactus League play, he has 9 strikeouts. He's allowed 6 runs on a whopping 13 hits. The 25-year-old is going to have to be a bit sharper if he wants to earn a rotation spot. So I'm still saying, even though they're not, it's a likely he starts off in the bullpen. But there was one development that I was not aware of until I looked today and found that the Ben Brown added a new changeup grip. And they stated, and this is coming from the Cubs pitching coach, that his new changeup grip should significantly improve his effectiveness, especially with added strikeout potential from last year, where his strikeout rate was 29% per 5 innings, which is a really good strikeout percentage. With his fastball and curveball combo already strong enough for the first pass through the lineup, a reliable changeup would allow him to mix in other pitches and improve his ability to navigate lineups more effectively over longer outings. Assuming he stays healthy from last season's neck injury and performs well this spring, Kyle, with Javier Assad sideline, do you believe Ben Brown has a shot to take that 5th rotation spot for the Chicago Cubs?
Yeah, I do, and I certainly hope so. I mean, right now, I'm sorry, Sean, but we talked about this before last week when we talked about it with Alex Pat. This is, to me, Matthew Boyd is the biggest concern for the Chicago Cubs going into this season. And if you could have a security blanket like Ben Brown, a guy who starts to come around and pitch well, pitch like he does early in games, pitch like he did at certain points last season, then he could immediately be in your rotation. His bad game on Thursday, Sean, against the Royals, that one gives me the least concerns of everybody, because not only is it spring training, but remember, Ben Brown is coming off a major injury. And Sean, it was one of the strangest injuries I've ever seen in sports. I still really don't know exactly what happened with Ben Brown last year. I think maybe even the Cubs really don't know what happened with Ben Brown last year. But, for a guy that literally hasn't pitched in months, this is the guy who I'm not really that worried about. I do like to hear about this new changeup, because it seems like Ben Brown had no problem getting through the rotation the first inning, or maybe even the first few innings. But man, late in games, 4th, 5th inning, he started to fall apart. If he could add one more pitch to that arsenal, if he could add to that curveball and that fastball, he could become a very dangerous pitcher in Major League Baseball. And Sean, we've talked about this time and time again. Right now, the starting rotation has a lot of question marks. It's up in the air. They need a guy like Ben Brown or Jordan Wicks to step up and be that number, that consistent number 3, a guy who can do it week in and week out.
Yeah, and I touched on this at the beginning. And I think I did tell you, Chris Flexen got roughed up an inning and 2/3, 5 hits, 4 runs for earned, and the Cubs sent him down as well. The former Southsider seems to be struggling to find a fit. He's been roughed up in a couple of Cactus League relief appearances this year. He was rocking a pretty high, almost high, I think a 930 earned run average. So he's had his rough time. But I just want to touch on this really quick before we move on. I think it was really huge that we got to see Matt Shaw make his spring debut this past Sunday. He is obviously a crucial part, especially with the Cubs season opener against the Dodgers less than a couple weeks away. I don't know. They have a little over a week to finalize that roster. So Shaw's performance over these games will play pivotal, I believe, in their decision as the top prospect looks to eye and just demonstrate his readiness and consistency to be part and earn this starting spot at the hot corner on the north side. Hopefully he could be in for a big opportunity. And that's kind of what led me to profiling Gage Workman today, just because when I say this, Matt Shaw has all the potential in the world on paper, and that's what we keep hearing, correct? He could be this guy. But we really don't know. We don't know. We don't know a lot about Gage Workman, but we're going to dive into him in just a little bit. But I mean, to be honest, what are your thoughts and expectations, realistic expectations? Because I don't think anyone should be expecting this guy to come in and hit 330 with 25 home runs and 100 RBIs. What are your realistic expectations for Matt Shaw, maybe even splitting time with Gage Workman at the hot corner?
Yeah, well, that's just it, Sean. First and foremost, I don't expect Matt Shaw to be an everyday player. I think he's going to play the majority of the third base for the Cubs in 2025. But being a rookie going into his first season, we really don't know what to make of him. Like Sean, he is exactly what it is, a prospect. It's tough to tell with these guys. Even some guys who ended up being superstars in Major League Baseball, it takes them a while to get going. I would be happy if Matt Shaw hit 260 and somewhere from 14, 15, 16 home runs this season. That would be, to me, that's a good, successful season for Matt Shaw in the major leagues. The reason I do like Gage Workman so much, and it's somebody I think the Cubs should seriously consider keeping on this roster, is because exactly that, Sean. You don't know what you're going to get from Matt Shaw, and he started spring training with an oblique injury. That's something that can linger for months. I mean, right now, to me, the Cubs, of all the things that are happening in spring training, finding a legitimate backup third baseman should be at the top of their list. I mean, it sounds like, it seems to me, Sean, I mean, like, correct me if I'm wrong. You can tell me what you think, but it seems to me like Gage Workman has answered those questions for him, right?
Yeah, it seems as though Gage Workman is starting hot, and we're going to get into his numbers here in just a second and give everyone a little background on Gage Workman. But I went into the advanced numbers on Zips, and I don't know if anyone Zips is Fangraphs, and they have a prediction for the future. And Kyle, you're pretty close to what Fangraphs has for Matt Shaw, betting 250. On the year, and Gage Workman 222, and they have them combined, and this is what's great, is they have them combined for that hot corner at about 25 home runs. So if you're getting that, you got they have 12 for Gage Workman. I'm trying to Matt Shaw. They have 16 for so about 20, a little bit less. But if we can get that production, and 250 out of one guy, and you're playing their strengths, I think that's a lot of good stuff for us at that hot corner, because that's a place that you need production from if you're going to be a competitive team in Major League Baseball. So,
yeah, Sean, and it's. For me personally, I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of that power, maybe that power that Patrick Wisdom or Isaac Paredes brings here, for a guy who hits a higher average. And I think ultimately Matt Shaw will be a hitter who hits for high average. But going into his rookie season, you can't set your expectations too high. That's too much pressure to put on a rookie, especially coming to Major League, Sean. We know the transition from the minor leagues to the major leagues in baseball is probably the toughest transition of any major league sport or any professional sport in the United States. I would be ecstatic if he hit 250, 260, and 16 home runs. I think that'd be a very good season for Matt Shaw. But like I said, at this point, I don't know if the Cubs believe that they have a clear backup plan to Matt Shaw at third base. If anything does happen, if that oblique continues to bother him. Yeah. And to be honest with you, we talked about this yesterday. I am not a huge fan of the idea of putting Justin Turner at third base. I just
no.
Sean, we've seen guys like Nolan Arenado go from one of the best defensive third basemen in baseball to good to average because of his age. He's clearly lost the step, and that's nothing against him. I love Arenado. I think he's one of the best third basemen of all time. But Justin Turner, almost 40 years old, he probably lost more than a step. He's probably lost a couple steps. And there's just too much range at third base, too much ground to cover for it to have him there. Maybe for a couple games here and there, but certainly not as like your immediate backup plan. So, I mean, if Matt Shaw does struggle, or if Matt Shaw, like if they have him at 250 average on, that means basically they're saying he's going to go through some months where he's going to hit somewhere around 200, 220. Mm-hmm. If he does get in one of those ruts, you'd have Gage Workman there, a guy who's been in major leagues for a while now. I mean, not major leagues, but he's been in the minor league for a while now. He was a top 30 prospect in the Detroit system at one time. I just think that their plan going into the season should be Matt Shaw starting at third, and Gage Workman should be his immediate backup. I would say Justin Turner for me would be more of an emergency fill-in, But I mean, do you agree, Sean? What do you think about Turner at third base?
I do agree. I don't want to see Justin Turner at third. He hasn't played third base in 2 years. There's a reason behind that. Probably the reasons that you just said: slower, not as quick to be able to get to those hot balls going down the line. He was getting stretched out, and I'll be honest. And I'm a big guy, and you guys know this. I'm a big guy at reading people and listening to their body mechanics. When he was interviewed, he didn't seem really happy about it.
They seemed surprised.
Yeah,
They
he's
were
like,
like,
I haven't played there in 2 years.
yeah, they were like, so third base. He was like, yeah. Well, how about it?
So
I like the addition. I like Justin.
I do too.
I just don't like him at third base. I think he'd be great as a backup at first for Michael Busch, and I think he'd be great as a DH in case, say, Suzuki inevitably has another injury, which I don't wish for it. I don't want it to happen, but
I hope not.
if I were the Cubs, I would bet on it happening. I mean, if you're smart, you should bet on it happening because Seiya Suzuki has missed a big chunk of the season every year since he's joined the major leagues.
Well, Kyle, since we already kind of went into Mr. Gage Workman, we're going to give today's Cubs player profile, and it's on none other than Gage Workman. I'm actually personally pretty excited about Mr. Workman coming to the Cubs. I think that this guy can be a hell of a performer. He was selected in the Rule 5 draft from Detroit. Obviously, Detroit decided not to protect the 25-year-old who was, as Kyle just stated, a top 30 prospect in the Tigers farm system. I'm not quite sure that they're going to be happy to lose this kid as they continue to see him develop. The Tigers originally drafted Workman in the 4th round of the 2020 draft. The same year they selected former Arizona State teammate Spencer Torkelson, one of my favorite names in baseball, with the number 1 overall pick. The thinking must have been that he didn't reach AAA yet, and he wasn't ready for the big leagues. Workman has a decent floor because of his above-average speed and overall actions on the dirt and his impressive arm strength. He's a solid defensive shortstop, but he's spent the lion's share, as we just talked about, playing third base for the Chicago Cubs, which has seemed to be an even better fit. As we just stated, he's trying to win the backup job to Matt Shaw. Some of his strengths are he has aggressiveness on the base pads. He should be a constant stolen base threat. As far as we know, excuse me, I lost. He's a late blooming infielder. He has intriguing power potential. He's a line drive hitter, so he has the potential to hit doubles, and he has the home run ability. But a couple of his strengths, he's had some inconsistency at the plate that's held him back. He has a hard swing that can generate impressive results when he makes contact, but struggles with plate discipline, and situational awareness. His swing consistency makes it hard for him to maintain a steady approach. One night he can punish pitchers, and the next he can fail to make any kind of contact. He did, though, since he made this adjustment, cut his strike rate down from 38% to 27% last summer, and this was due to Mr. Workman discontinuing being a switch hitter. He abandoned it last year in Double-A, which was his decision to stay down in Double-A a little bit longer, and now he exclusively hits from the left side. And if we talk about that and your need for left-handed hitters in baseball, you can see his stats. This was after he decided last night, they're scrolling on the bottom, or last season, after he decided no longer to be a switch hitter. Workman's strong season last year in Double-A Erie, as you can see, he showcased the power, showcased a blend of power and speed, 18 home runs, 89 RBIs, 30 stolen bases, 842 OPS, 142 games. He seems to have the potential to be a well-rounded contributor, but offensively and defensively, since transitioning strictly to the left side. So there does seem to be, though, a little competition growing at this position. between Workman, Vidal Bujan, and Nicky Lopez. Bujan is known for his speed and versatility and has some major league experience. He's also the guy who came over in the Matt Mervis trade. He has shown some flashes of potential, while Workman's strong season at Double-A last year makes him an intriguing candidate as well. Nicky Lopez is a non-roster invitee that could bring some solid defensive versatility, contact hitting to the mix, potentially adding a wrinkle to this competition. And I just wanted to showcase a couple of things. Couldn't find a lot of video on this gentleman, but we did see they did state he had a lot of problems hitting from the left side of the plate. Here's his first home run of the year, and it came off of none other than a left-handed pitcher.
Left-handed thrower, Robleski. Hits it in the air to deep left. Heading back after it is Hope. Hope looking up, and this ball is gone. Just cleared the wall in left field and opposite.
One thing I took away from that, Kyle, you saw that power. Where'd he go? He went oppo.
Yep.
So that's kind of exciting, Kyle. What do you think about Gage Workman? I know you touched on a little bit. His overall prospects, he had a very solid season, as you can see, top 30 prospect. Where do we see this kid moving forward?
Well, like I said, he should, to me, he's a backup third baseman. And, I think that ultimately Gage Workman at 25 years old, which we know for baseball is pretty young, guys, he ultimately probably has a higher ceiling. I'm not saying that he's going to end up being the starting third baseman for the Cubs for the next 10 years, but based off of what he's done in the spring training and Double-A, and that's all we have to go off of, Sean. And the fact that he was ranked number 29 in Detroit's farm system, which you guys is a pretty good farm system. I mean, they've had a top 5 pick for like the last 30 years. I mean, that farm system is competitive, and that's the reason that Gage Workman's no longer there. And, him being a Rule 5 player, ultimately, guys, what that means is if he doesn't make the Cubs major league roster, he will be sent back to Detroit. Yeah. I just think, Sean, I like Nicky Lopez. We all know what he is. He's a defensive utility player. The Cubs already have one of those guys in Dansby Swanson. He has not been hitting well since he's joined the Cubs. He had 242 last year. If he continues to do that, you can't have two guys in your infield hitting less than 250. That's what Nicky Lopez is. He's a guy who's better known for his defense. Even if you decide to part ways, ultimately, Sean, I think the Cubs are going to keep one of the 3 players you just mentioned, Bujan, Lopez, and Workman. If you let Lopez go, you could always bring him back if you want. I think I like Bujan. I like what he's done. But Sean, what's the thing we've been begging for the last 2 years in the Cubs lineup? Power. And of all those 3 guys, to me, Gage Workman seems to have the highest ceiling, and he's the guy that can hit home runs. He's proven it. He's already got 3 in spring training. He had a good season in Double-A last year. By all accounts, this is a good prospect in baseball who's ultimately expected to play for a major league roster at some point. Why not the Cubs? Knowing the Cubs, Sean, and I hate to be this pessimistic Cubs fan, but knowing them, they'll decide not to hit him to the major league roster. He'll go back to Detroit. Matt Shaw will get hurt, and the Cubs will trade prospects away to get Gage Workman back here at some point. That's probably what's going to happen, knowing that.
Well, and at third base, let's flash some leather really quick.
Test this spring training. But the box that you see on TV, the ball strike box, that's measured from the front of the plate. So that's a little different.
Yeah. I still have some issues with the interpretation of that.
There's a bouncing ball to third. That's one-handed by Gage Workman.
That's a great play right there.
That's just a baseball name, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
Workman. It's just a baseball name.
And I'll be honest, Kyle, I think our coach, Craig Counsell, is starting to fall in love with him. He said he's probably in the toughest situation of anybody coming into camp. Cubs manager Craig Counsell stated, it's a brand new organization. You know what a Rule 5 draft pick means. I think he's handled it with a lot of maturity. That's led to some really good performances, and it's really letting Gage kind of shine, Counsell said. That's a left-handed bat with some power, good plate discipline, a good defender, and he's shown all of these things, which is really hard to do in such a small sample size. And I have his comments rolling at the bottom as we speak about this. If you can impress Craig Counsell, I think you're going to have a pretty good shot, because I love Craig Counsell's brain. I think he's got one of the best baseball minds in the game. So I'm really impressed. He seems to be really impressed, which makes me really impressed, which hopefully means Gage Workman will be sticking around. And we're going to find out pretty quickly, because we are just, I think, is today 10? What's today? Yeah, today is 10 days away from the Cubs trip across the country to take on the $1 billion Dodgers in Japan.
Across the world.
Across the world. Yeah, across the world. Like I said, country, but it's across the world. Owen Casey and Brandon. Brandon brings up Owen Casey. Owen Casey is very powerful. Unfortunately, Owen Casey has not been able to showcase his skill this spring. He is nursing an injury, and I can't remember off the top of my brain what it is. But Owen Casey, I believe, has also been sent back down to AAA to kind of recover, get some plate appearances.
Yeah, Sean, even without the injury, I think their plans were always to bring Owen Casey up in 2026, probably when that Ian Happ contract runs out. I mean, I think Owen Casey is probably still a year away from major leagues. Maybe he comes up maybe he's one of the September roster additions. But for right now, I'd say the one thing the Cubs don't have any question marks about is their outfield, and I would keep it the way it is right now. I love the Ian. It'd be fine to bring Owen Casey up here if you want somebody to be like a bench guy or a guy who could be a DH. But right now, Ian Happ, PCA, and Kyle Tucker are the strength of this team on offense, no doubt about it. I do like Owen Casey a lot. I love that interview he had on Marquee Network the other day. It was awesome. He seems like a fun, easygoing guy, man. He obviously loves baseball. I know he's champing at the bits to get up to the major league roster, but right now with that outfield, the way they have it lined up, I think all three of those guys in the top 100. Was PCA in the top 100?
Yes,
in the top 100, right?
Yes.
I think ultimately PCA could end up being the Cubs' best player. He might be a superstar. We don't know yet. But if he could get hit for average, if that guy can hit around 260, anytime he gets on the base paths, he is just absolutely a headache. So if he can hit somewhere around 260, 265, he's going to be one of the best players in baseball.
Yeah, and I'll tell you another intriguing part of that outfield is the Jaguar, Kevin Alcantara, who we did a player profile on 2 weeks ago. I expect him to be sent down as well and maybe return to the club if there's an injury of any kind of sort. So the topic of the show is, can the Cubs compete for the NLCS? Can they win this division? And I wanted to bring this up because I believe next week we're going to have a special guest, and we'll get that out if we do have a special guest next week. But I wanted to talk about this because the Cubs will be heading to Japan. They will be taking on the Dodgers, and then from that, they will have a couple of days where they come back, do a couple spring training things, and then boom, the baseball season begins. And it will begin, I believe, for the Cubs 10 days after they return from Japan, give or take. Don't quote me on that, but it's really close to that. So I just wanted to get into this because we've had a lot of Kyle, you and I were talking about this on the phone yesterday, and I was like, you know what a great topic for the show to say, hey, has this gentleman done enough to get the Cubs back to win this, not only win this division, but compete against the likes of the Mets, the Phillies, the Dodgers, the Braves in this division, as we are in the National League. He did make some additions. Here are the additions that the Chicago Cubs have made this offseason. Carson Kelly, love him. Think he's a quality backup for Miguel Amaya, veteran, can frame pitch as well, has a little bit of a bat, and can get the ball down to second base. We just went over Gage Workman. Obviously, Kyle Tucker, one of the best players in baseball, John Birdie, and Vidal Brujan.
Yeah, and then obviously this picture here was probably made a couple weeks ago, but you have to add Justin Turner to that list as well.
Yes, and Justin Turner. Yes, I did get this for sure. And Justin Turner. And then over here on the pitching side, which I am really happy about, and I'm going to go in order of what I'm happy about, starting with what I'm happy about the most. Eli Morgan, Ryan Presley, Ryan Brazier,
Colin Ray, that's it. That's it.
All right.
Listen, I don't want to make this clear. I don't hate Matthew Boyd, and I know that Matthew Boyd has had success in the major leagues before, but for 2 years, $29 million for a guy who's been pretty inconsistent his entire career. I mean, this guy is another guy. He reminds me of Jose Quintana, when the Cubs traded one of the best pitchers in baseball away in Dylan Cease to acquire Jose Quintana, and we're trying to convince us that Jose Quintana was going to go from this inconsistent pitcher, come to the Cubs, and all of a sudden be a sub-2 ERA kind of guy. Like, no, he's probably what he's been for the last 5 years, and he's just inconsistent. That's what Matthew Boyd is. So I just don't understand the money. The Cubs could have added another really valuable piece to this team with $29 million, even if it was a 1-year contract. Instead, they decided to give it to Matthew Boyd in 2 years. It just didn't make any sense to me, Sean. He has not looked good in spring training. I'm not going to, once again, I don't take a lot for, there's just too much stuff going on in spring training with these pitchers. We've seen really, 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 really good pitchers get beat up in spring training. They've come out and said, hey, sorry to the fans. I'm trying to add to my pitch arsenal. I'm practicing, working on things, tweaking things. It just didn't work out for me today. But Matthew Boyd is one that really makes me nervous. If I were the Cubs, I would have an immediate backup plan for him because I think he's going to start the season in the rotation, Sean. For 2 years, $29 million. He better start the season in the rotation.
I'm just trying to look up because, Colin Ray has started 2 games, 4.2 innings pitched, 193 earned run average so far, 4 walks, and 5 strikeouts. I was going to say I haven't seen him in too many of the box scores that I've looked at. So
he's been around for a long. You know what you're going to get from Colin Ray. You know what you're going to get. Colin Ray is going to have stretches where Cubs fans who don't know a lot about Colin Ray or the Cubs, are going to be begging for him to stay in the lineup because he's pitching so well. And then he's going to have stretches where people are like, don't put him in the lineup. Don't put him in the lineup. Please don't. He's ultimately what, Sean? 3.84 ERA guy. I mean, for his career, is it somewhere around there? What's his ERA at?
He's around a 4. He's around a 4.
That's who I expect him to be for this Cubs team. I expect him to be kind of like the Drew Smyly, one of those long inning relievers in case somebody gets hurt or if the Cubs are getting beat up or beating the crap out of somebody. He can come in and chew up 3 or 4 innings, but he's certainly should not be considered anywhere near the beginning of this rotation. I mean, for me personally, the 3 has to come down to Jordan Wicks or Ben Brown. I think Jamison Tyon ultimately could fill the 3, but I would push Tyon back to the 4. I would try to make sure if Jordan Wicks or Ben Brown can be consistently dominant, like they've shown in stretches, they would be my number 3. I think that's their highest ceiling. I think that's, and Sean, how would you feel if the Cubs made a playoff round and Jamison Tyon's your 3rd pitcher in that playoff rotation? Would you feel good about that?
Oh, no. Especially not in the playoffs, man. When you have
against the Mets, Dodgers, Phillies, Braves. I mean, no, I don't want Jamison Tyon pitching.
I hate to say it. I mean, as we talk about this, when we talk about these top lineups, there's a lot of people sleeping on the Cincinnati Reds, man. That Cincinnati Reds lineup is not easy to navigate through, man. Matt McClain's going to be back this year. Spencer Steer is an absolute stud. You got Ella De La Cruz in that lineup. That lineup is stacked from top to bottom. Now their pitching is another thing. Hunter Green's never come around. They do got Lolo over there, and they got one other. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. They got one other pitcher that can turn around and be Abbott. Former top draft pick Abbott. I can't remember his first name off the top of my head right now. But they do have some potential in that rotation. Out of all the teams in the Central, the Reds scare me the most. They really do. They do. The Cardinals don't scare me. I think the Brewers are finally going to take a step back.
See, for me personally, I think the Brewers are going to stay right where they're at. The Reds always read it up and the Brewers always brew it up, man. First of all, I don't think William Contreras is given anywhere near enough credit by Major League Baseball and Major League Baseball fans. I think that guy is a bona fide superstar. They still have Christian Yelich there. If Christian Yelich has a good season, he could be a superstar. And then obviously they have, why do I always forget his name? The prospect in the outfield, Sean, what's his name? Why is it escaping me? For the Brewers.
Jackson Chourio?
Yeah, Jackson Chourio. I think he's going to be another really good player in baseball. The Brewers and the pitching staff is still really good. The Brewers, to me, are the team to watch out for. I like the Reds, Sean. I agree with you. Their lineup can be absolutely scary, dangerous. But the problem with the Reds is, first of all, there's a lot of inconsistent players on the team, including Hunter Green, who is everybody considers their ace. That guy is incredibly inconsistent. You saw it in the All-Star game last year. He was one of the worst pitchers in the All-Star game. And on top of that, they just seem to deal with more injuries or more bad luck than any team. They kind of remind me of the old Detroit Lions. Like even when they have the roster, something just always goes wrong for that team. And maybe I'll eat my words and they'll end up winning this division. But to me, it's still going to be a race between the Cubs and the Brewers.
Nick Lodolo and Graham Ashcraft was the other guy. They do have Andrew Abbott there. And
Ashcraft, that's another guy who's incredibly Ashcraft, when he's on, he's scary.
Yeah.
Scary. When he's off, it's like batting practice. I've never seen a guy with such big ebbs and flows as Ashcraft. That guy, John, do you remember that game, that stretch last year? I think it was like 4 games where he allowed like 4 games. He allowed like 6 hits total. I mean, he was amazing. And then the Cubs played him 2 weeks later, and they hit like 5 home runs off of him. I'm like, what is with this guy?
And I'll tell you this too. Alexis Diaz is their closer now. He had a dominant year 2 years ago. Last year, not so much. So I think that's going to be a key factor for them turning it around, is if Alexis Diaz can be the same closer he was in 2023, because he was not that same closer in 2024.
I think the Reds are in a very similar situation as the Cubs. There's a lot of ifs. And if a lot of those ifs go their way, they're going to be a very good team. If they don't, they're going to be average to below average. That's the roster that the Reds have built.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. I just think at some point they're going to break out, and they're going to
have stretches, Sean, where they're scoring 10, 11, 12. They're going to have some huge games for sure. I think Eddie De La Cruz is one of the most exciting players in sports. I love watching him. I think it sucks that he's on a Cubs division opponent, but he's an amazing player. I expect him to continue to get better, if anything. I mean, there's going to be some tough games against the Reds, but I think ultimately, if you look at the 2 rosters on paper, I still think the Cubs probably are a little bit better than the Reds. I will say this, Sean. You're talking about what kind of where do the Cubs stand in the NL? I still like the Phillies roster better. I like the Braves roster better. I like the Dodgers roster better. And I think with Soto on the Mets, the Mets are probably a little bit as well. Especially if Pete Alonso can wake up and get out of this slump that he's been in for the last year or so. But
as we've been talking about this, we have very different perspectives from Pacoda and Fangraphs on this particular situation.
Too many ifs.
Fangraphs has the Cubs at 19 games over 500, winning the division by 10 games over the Milwaukee Brewers.
Yeah, look who's on the bottom of the list there, Sean.
And I just don't agree. I just don't agree with that. I mean, I guess when it comes to the Fangraph part, or Pacoda, it could be that pitching for, they might score 10 runs but give up 11 type deal with the Cincinnati Reds. I know the lineup's going to be dangerous. And then here we go. I didn't get the divisions. I just took, according to Fangraphs, the Cubs record's going to be 84-78. I mean, there's a big disparity. They're only giving them on Fangraphs a 42% chance to win the division, a 10% chance of getting one of the top 2 seeds, and only a 55% chance of making the playoffs. I mean, there's a huge disparity, because if you go over here, 86% chance to win the playoffs, or to make the playoffs, an 80% chance to win the division. So Pacoda and Fangraphs are way tipping the scales in different directions between these 2 teams. Now, if I asked you a couple of things here, these are the 4 things to me, Kyle, and I want to get your perspective on them, because I know they're very important to any team in any sport across sports. So number 1, the Cubs last year did not stay healthy. And for me, for the Cubs to compete, win this division, and ultimately compete for the NLCS, their pitchers are going to have to stay healthy, and they're going to have to be able to handle the depth of the grind of the full season and the postseason. And we're not going to spend too much time on this, because we just talked about the pitchers. But that also goes for Seiya Suzuki, Dansby Swanson, Matt Shaw, Michael Busch, all of these guys. Give me your health perspective and what you think about the depth of some of these other positions, Turner at first splitting time, some of those things that you think maybe the health will be a little bit better because the bullpen's a little bit deeper. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, at least for the lineup 1 through 9, they definitely have gotten better when it comes to depth. I think the Cubs could sustain an injury. I don't think it could be anything like Kyle Tucker out for the season. I think that would pretty much probably be it for them. But I think they could sustain a minor injury here and there, like you said, Sean. If a guy like, say, Suzuki in particular, and the reason I bring him up is because he's ultimately been injured basically every year since he's been here. But you could put a Justin Turner at DH there. I think the Cubs have the depth to make it through minor injuries here and there. Now, probably in the rotation as well, with the addition of Colin Ray, you still have Javier Assad. I know he's injured right now, but Javier Assad is expected to be back soon. You have Ben Brown and Jordan Wicks. I mean, they have the plethora of options there in their starting rotation. The bullpen, to me, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you guys. I think the bullpen, we won't know until we see it. It remains to be seen. I like some of the additions they made, particularly Eli Morgan. I love that guy. I think he's going to be really, really good for the Cubs. I think he's going to be a very important piece for the Cubs, but yeah, Sean, if they have 2 or 3 major injuries in that bullpen, like say Porter Hodge and Eli Morgan go down at the same time, then it starts to get a little bit rough there. It starts to worry me a little bit. Another thing it's so problematic for Cubs fans is we just don't know what they're planning on doing with these guys in the farm system. How many of these guys are going to be brought up this year? How many of these guys are going to get live game action? When they do bring them up, if they're performing well, are the Cubs going to keep them here? Or they send them back down like they did with Alex Bregman and all the other guys last year? We just don't know. We don't know. I think the Cubs are deeper now than they have been for the last 2 years, but I still think ultimately if they sustain some major injuries, they're in trouble. And every team in baseball is going to have injuries. Every team in baseball is going to have injuries. So, but like say, Sean, the Mets lose Juan Soto. They're probably out of it. That's probably it. They're probably done. If the Cubs lose Kyle Tucker, they're probably done. If the Dodgers lose Ohtani, that's going to hurt them tremendously. But they've definitely put themselves in a better position. And you put that picture of Jed Hoyer up. The more I read, and I hate to beat a dead horse here, guys, but the more I read, it sounds like Jed Hoyer wants to spend money. He wants to go after these guys like Max Fried and Ohtani and Soto. The Ricketts just won't let him. So ultimately, if this does fail again for the 3rd season in a row and the Cubs fall short of the playoffs, it's the Ricketts who it's Tom Ricketts who needs to take the place, needs to take the blame.
And as we say that, the Cubs, and I just flashed this a minute ago, will enter the season with 6 top 100 players on their roster. Now, if we agree,
PCA did not make the list.
PCA did not make the list, which is a crime to me, but I don't think he's earned it yet. But I could see next year going into 2026, him being on this list and Kyle Tucker no longer being in the pinstripes on the north side. So we may have an addition and a subtraction. So
it's so strange to me that the Cubs have been so overly patient with all of these guys, PCA, Alcantara, like Brandon mentioned in the comments, Casey, so patient, like, hey, we'll bring them up when we feel they're good and ready. But then they go get a guy like Kyle Tucker, who I love. I'm not mad about the fact that the Cubs got a guy like Kyle Tucker, but they trade away probably what's going to ultimately be their best prospect in Cam Smith. It's like, so you're so patient with all these guys who are probably, some of them are going to be middle of the road type players. But a guy who had superstar potential, 40 home run power, you were so quick to trade away for a Kyle Tucker, who's probably ultimately going to end up being a 1-year rental. If the Cubs do not extend Kyle Tucker, this is going to be one of the most disheartening trades in Cubs history, because I think Cam Smith's the type of player who could be on the Houston Astros for the next 10 years and be one of the best home run hitters in baseball. So it's sad, Sean. It's tough being a baseball fan. You fall in love with these guys, and they rotate. They move so fast to get these guys. I mean, I had a Dylan Cease jersey, Sean. I had a jersey. I don't know where it is now, but I had one.
I will tell you this. I agree with you 1,000,000% on this. I mean, I think Cam Smith right now was batting .650 in the spring.
Don't talk about it.
And launching home runs left and right. I mean,
he is the spring training MVP.
Yeah, you have to figure out a way to get Kyle Tucker back here, or it's just egg on your face. And, and before we move on, there's some part of me that wants to think that because of the handcuffs that Jed Hoyer has to deal with, that maybe he's like, you know what? I'll see what I can do this year, show other teams that I am a good GM, and I'm going to bail on Chicago because they just won't let me build the
Wouldn't
team that
surprise
I
me.
want. You know, I don't know. I don't have any statistical or any facts or any articles about that. That's just coming out of my brain, just kind
Well,
of.
Sean, whether you have factual basis or not, it doesn't matter. I mean, they ultimately did that at the manager position. They got Craig Counselor because they were like, hey, we're not going to spend a lot of money. Can you get the most out of a little? That's why we're bringing you here. We want somebody who can get the most out of a lineup that's really not all that spectacular. That's probably the position, Jed Hoyer. That's probably why ultimately Theo Epstein left the Chicago Cubs. He's like, why would I be here when I can go to a team like the Red Sox or the Dodgers and the Yankees? They're going to spend a ton of money. It's going to be easy to win, and they're going to make me look really good. Why would you stay in Chicago? I mean, you know that Chicago's that type of team where they'll go all out, and I'm talking about in terms of Chicago Cubs, Tom Ricketts all out, make a run at a championship for a couple of years, and then that window will close for 6 years, and then they'll go do the same thing again. The window will close for 6 years. Like, it's just it doesn't make sense to me. They're the fourth most valuable team in baseball. I'm not going to dive too deep into the show because we talked about it all last week, but it's really, really sad. I think the Cubs, I think they should have been involved in the Ohtani sweepstakes. I think they should be involved in every major free agent sweepstake. They are a major market team, Chicago, Illinois, the mighty Chicago Cubs. They were the only team on national television nationwide for years, worldwide in some countries. Yes, the biggest fan base of any team in professional sports, all the professional sports. And I'm talking about overseas as well. They may have the biggest fan base of any team in the world. And here we are, getting charged $27 for Jameson Ginger Ale and being told we don't have any money left for the baseball team in the same breath. It's sad. It's disheartening.
And Scott brings up a good point here, man. It's the same reason Theo bailed, man. He wanted no part of this cheap crap. So,
you know what's crazy is I believe that Theo Epstein, he is so smart and just such a good businessman and just such a statistical guy that I think Theo Epstein ultimately will end up being the next baseball commissioner if he moves on. Yeah, if he wants it. And this guy, you could have kept him here until that day. He could have been here. I mean, the guy who they're like, man, this guy's so amazing. It's so awesome. He could be the next baseball commissioner. And he could have spent the rest of his career managing teams in Chicago. And instead, he was like, I got to get out of here. I'm done with this. I got to get out of here.
That's pretty sad, man. I'm not going to lie. The second part of, can we win this division and make it back to the NLCS? And I think these three parts right here, or three players, I should say, are going to be the most important cogs. And I really want to get your opinion on this, where you stand. The development of players like Pete Crow-Armstrong, Miguel Amaya, and Matthew Shaw. These guys, in order for the Cubs to take that step, they have to take the next step. Because if they do, I will say this, hey, no doubt about it, the Cubs will be very, very dangerous if these guys are clicking on all cylinders. And I'm just going to throw some numbers about what these kids did while Kyle rebuttals the first and second half numbers of PCA and our boy Miguel Amaya, because the second half of the season is what we need to see them repeat.
I'm going to split that question into two parts, Sean. Yes, do I think the Cubs can make the playoffs? Absolutely, yes. Do I think the Cubs are good enough to make the NLCS? No, I don't. I think ultimately the Braves are a better team. Like I stated, the Mets are a better team. I think the Phillies are a better team. I think the Dodgers are a better team. I think the Cubs will be a formidable opponent in the NL this year. I think they're going to be fun to watch. I think they'll be playing meaningful baseball games in August and probably September. Do I think they're good enough to compete with the teams I just mentioned? No. There's just too much. If everything went the Cubs' way, if every single question mark we have about this Cubs roster went the Cubs' way, if Jordan Wicks ended up being one of the most dominant pitchers in the NL, if Brent Brown could stretch those 4 dominant innings into 6, 7, 8 dominant innings every single start, if Matt Shaw ends up hitting 260 with 20 home runs, and Kyle Tucker is the Kyle Tucker he's been in Houston for the last 3-4 years, if Seiya Suzuki could stay healthy and continues to 280 with 30 bombs, then the Cubs could be. But Sean, let's just face it, the odds of all of that stuff going the way we want it to go is pretty slim. I think 2 of the most important players on the Chicago Cubs, for me personally, and I've mentioned them in the show earlier, Jordan Wicks to me is huge for that rotation. Huge. If Jordan Wicks could be a guy who can pitch to around a 3 ERA and be a consistent number 3, so you would have Steele, Imanaga, Wicks, Tyon, and then whoever you decide, Ray, Brown, Saad, if Jordan Wicks could be a pillar of this lineup, this starting rotation, that would help the Cubs tremendously. And then another guy who I think is incredibly important to this season and this team is Crow-Armstrong. If Crow-Armstrong can be the guy he was in the second half of last season, and he becomes one of the best players in all of baseball, one of the most, certainly the most dangerous base runner in all of baseball. There's not even a question. He is the most dangerous base runner in all of baseball. If he can be just almost as dangerous at the plate, hit for a little more power like he did at the end of last season, man, your lineup starts to get a lot scarier, Sean. Then you're talking about 1 through 9, where you're like, man, there's just really no easy out in this lineup. There really isn't. The another guy who I think has to improve drastically for the Cubs to make a deep push in the playoffs is Dansby Swanson. Listen, guys, I love the story. Oh, he's married to a Chicago soccer player. I love the fact that he's Mr. 162. He really misses game. I love his defense. Obviously, he's one of the best defensive shortstops in baseball, but this guy cannot hit 240 again. He cannot hit 240. He needs to hit somewhere between at least 250 and 260, and that's like the floor for me. That's the floor for me. Dansby Swanson is the highest paid player on the Chicago Cubs. It's time for him to start playing like that. It's time for him to start earning that money.
I agree. And as we speak, right now, Crow-Armstrong is off to a hot spring, batting .500. Well, Dansby Swanson is batting .222. So hopefully he's just working out some things. I know that last year he was bothered by an ankle injury and a foot injury, I believe, that really, they said, hampered him in the box. So hopefully that's past him. He's working on his swing, and he's going to get in. He's going to get up to that 250, 260 mark during this season. And that's going to bring me to my next 2 points, because you kind of touched on both of them, but we're going to revisit it really quick. Pitching consistency for the Cubs, man, it needs to step up, especially if you're going to make the postseason, where 2 good starts out of a Shota and a Steele could flip a series, and you can get back to them if you have to start a Tyon or a Ray or a Board or a Boyd or a Wicks. You know, the biggest concern for me is Jameson Tyon, if he can stay the course of last season, because as we touched on a couple of weeks ago, he kind of started – he lost 2 miles per hour on his velocity, on his fastball. He dropped from 94 to 92 last year. And, you know, this just gives me more concerns about starters 3, 4, and 5, because I do think we're going to see some consistency out of Shota. I don't think he's going to be a disaster. We all know what we're getting out of Justin Steele. I am not a fan of – I don't hate Matthew Boyd. It's just not a guy that I want to say, all right, this is the guy I'm locking down my 4th spot on. I'm with you when you talk about Jordan Wicks, because the one thing that I love about Jordan Wicks, and is a huge, huge thing at Wrigley Field, is he's a ground ball pitcher. You need a ground ball pitcher at Wrigley Field.
There's times where he's been a high strikeout guy as well. I mean, that's you need swing and miss, man. Ultimately in baseball, you need swing and miss.
And my last part here is going to bring me back to what Kyle just said. If there's anything else you want to add on to 3, 4, and 5 in that rotation, Kyle?
Man, it's just so.
I mean, we talked about
this is what I'm talking about with the ifs. I mean,
there's a lot of ifs.
And you know, even just to say right there, you said, you know, we know what we're going to get from Justin Steele. I mean, what if Justin Steele has a down season? He takes.
God.
And Imanaga, like with all the him being a fly ball pitcher in Wrigley Field, you know, could that blow up in the Cubs? Could he pitch to a 3 or 4 ERA this season and ultimately end up being a 3 or 4 in the rotation? I mean, the Cubs just need somebody to step up and be dominant. And I don't know if they have it on this roster. And if they do want to make a realistic push in the playoffs, they need to go acquire somebody like that. Go get a guy like Dylan Cease. Unfortunately for the Cubs, that's going to cost them some prospects again. And you just trade away Cam Smith. If you're adding these guys, Dylan Cease and Kyle Tucker, solely to be rentals, then you're basically just ruining your future by adding these rentals. And then if you don't win the World Series, then ultimately it was a failure. I agree with what you said, Sean. I don't want Matthew Boyd. I don't want him on the Cubs, to be honest with you. I certainly don't want him in this rotation. I don't want him in this rotation. I think if you're going to pitch guys based off of guys who you think are inconsistent, then give it to the guys who you don't know what their ceiling is yet, right? Why would the Cubs even consider putting Matthew Boyd or Colin Ray in their starting rotation when they don't know if Ben Brown, Jordan Wicks, or Javier Assad could be sub-3 ERA pitchers for the rest of their careers? Javier Assad did it for almost a year and a half. When Ben Brown is on, he looks like he could do it for long periods of time. So why those guys, I think, should get first crack. And if they don't, then shame on the Cubs, because these are guys who are young. They've been here for a long time. Ben Brown looked incredible last season until that injury. Javier Assad went a year and a half with being one of the most consistent pitchers in baseball. I know people are like, yeah, but he got in trouble all the time. Well, he got out of it. So until he doesn't get out of it, until it starts biting him in the butt, I'm still gonna put a lot of stock in Javier Assad. And then Jordan Wicks is a guy who, when they drafted him in the first round, they were like, "Oh, he has the best curveball of any pitcher in baseball in college. It's a major league ready curveball. He's going to be up in less than a year, maybe a year tops." And then it took him 2 years to get here. And then all of a sudden, the Cubs were like, Cubs fans, the Cubs franchise alike, are just like out on him. Like, he got hurt last year, and they were like, nobody's even talking about him being in the rotation. I thought this guy was going to be like a 2 or 3 staple in the rotation for the next 5-10 years. Now people are talking about him like he doesn't even exist. It just doesn't make it. There's too many question marks, Sean.
And I agree with Scott here, man. If Shota takes a step back, we need 3, 4, and 5 to step up. And here, if I could say I'm cautiously optimistic over being cautiously pessimistic, I would take the optimistic side, because I do, and I don't know if we agree on this or not, I do think the bullpen is better than it was last year.
Oh, most certainly. No doubt it's better than it was last year.
I do think that
is Edbert Alzolay here?
No, he's not.
Then it's better than it was last year.
I would just say, like, a lot of people get upset because Javier Assad would only be able to pitch 5 innings, but that's very important as well. If he can get through 5 innings, and you have those pitchers that can get you to 6 and 7, and then you have to turn, over to bullpen to 8 and 9, and you have to use this. Craig Counsell is a master at figuring out bullpens. He did it in Milwaukee forever.
And Sean, breaking news, you guys, this is the way baseball's going. 5, 6
it
innings is the expectation. That's why these teams are adding so many pitchers. 5, 6 innings is the expectation. Bad news. The Paul Skeens of the world are slowly disappearing. Yeah. These guys who could go 7, 8, 9 innings. And you even saw it with the Pittsburgh Pirates last year. There was an opportunity for him to pitch a no-hitter, and he had a low pitch count, and they still took him out of the game. Those days are almost gone.
Yeah, and for me, it's just, I wish there was a solid 1, 2, 3, because you can deal with 4 and 5, because most ball clubs do.
Well, Sean, you're
good ball clubs.
You're really good at the analytics, right? You always look, your brain's you're constantly looking through the analytics. What happened with Jordan Wicks that the Cubs, all these people are talking like he could no longer be a 3 in a rotation? I don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to me. I mean, this guy, he was highly drafted. He was drafted to be a 1, 2, 3, somewhere in there. A ceiling would be a 1, floor would be a 3, right? That's what he was drafted for. So what happened? Why all of a sudden is Jordan? I've seen, you keep showing these graphics. I've seen graphics with the Cubs projected starting rotation, and Jordan Wicks isn't even on there. I'm like, man, he's not even, like, they can't even do a 6-man and sneak him a couple starts here and there. I will say this though.
I was just say really quick. So far on Wicks, he's 2 games started, 4.2 innings pitched, 386 earned run average, 5 strikeouts. He has not walked a batter. He's allowed 7 hits and 2 runs, 1 home run, and 2 earned runs in 4 innings. He's truly a mystery to me. He's truly a mystery.
I think he's a mystery to the Cubs. I don't think the Chicago Cubs know what they have in Jordan Wicks. I don't think they know where he falls in that rotation. I don't know if they think he even deserves a spot in the rotation. I don't know, but it's a mystery to me too. It doesn't make any sense, because this is a guy you drafted in the first round. You expected him to be a major league pitcher. You expected him to be somewhere in 1, 2, 3 in the rotation. Where I don't think he did anything to prove us otherwise. I don't think he's done anything to take himself out of that conversation. I don't understand it.
Can I say maybe it's because he's from Kansas State?
Yeah, says the guy who loves the Royals and Bobby Witt Jr.
Well, he didn't go to Kansas State now.
I liked Jordan Wicks in Kansas. I liked the pick when the Cubs made
I
it.
did too.
I like this. This Jordan Wicks guy looks like he's going to be a very good pick. He just looked like he was going to be consistent. He looked like he was. I don't think Jordan Wicks was ever expected to be like a 1.4 ERA type pitcher. I don't think that was ever the goal. But 3.5, 3.5 ERA for the rest of his career in the middle of somebody's lineup. That's what I expected, and that's what it looked like they were doing. And then all of a sudden, one day they were just like, "Oh, he got hurt, so just get rid of him." And then here's another question mark for the Chicago Cubs, Sean, not to go down another whole rabbit hole and spend another 2 hours on the show, because we could probably talk about this guy in a different day, but Cade Horton?
I think Cade Horton came in injured. I'm not giving up on Cade Horton yet. I think that he'll be back.
Have the Cubs talked about their plans to when he's going to debut and his major? Nothing.
I haven't heard anything.
Nothing.
Cade Horton.
Nothing.
He has not pitched. He doesn't have a statistic. And I have not heard that he's been sent down. I could take a look really quick and see. I haven't. And maybe this is why the Cubs didn't spend big, because they still maybe have faith in Horton and Wicks and Ben Brown. So let's see. The last article on him, Jesus, was February 8th.
How can you have your top prospect in the organization, another first round pick, a guy who was dominant in the College World Series championship, and you're like, hey, Cubs, what's going on with Cade Horton? They're like,
okay.
They're like, who?
All right, I got one here. Jordan Bastain of MLB.com. Horton's shoulder on February 24th. He faced 4 batters during a brief bullpen session. It says it was a short, meaningful appearance on the mound for Horton, who was facing live hitters for the first time in 9 months. The young righty ultimately was shut down last year due to a grade 2 right subscapitual strain. Whatever that is, 30-word letter. He's slowly building himself back up the camp. Horton was drafted by the Cubs in 2022. He's their top pitching prospect and is closing in on his major league debut season. He lost the 2024 campaign because of the injury after arriving at AAA Iowa. The Cubs would open up a spot on the 40-man roster. It says the question is, will he force the Cubs to open up a spot on the 40-man roster for the 23-year-old pitcher? So,
I think if the Cubs' plans aren't to trade for another stud pitcher and a number 2 in the rotation, ultimately their plans would be to groom Cade Horton to be that. But are the Cubs so cheap that they won't bring him up for that September date so they don't have to pay the arbitration? Like, is that what they're doing? Are they doing the same thing they did with Chris Bryant? Are we going to watch this all over again and have a wasted season when we could have gotten further in the playoffs because the Cubs aren't willing to pay that extra money to Cade Horton? That's what concerns me. It should concern all Cubs fans. They've done this in the past. They're certainly willing to do it again, I'm sure.
Brian, your brother here says Ryan Herrera wrote a great column about him less than a month ago. I'll have to Google search that. And welcome Phil into the chat. What's going on, man? Bear down, Phil. Cub up, bear down. You know what I mean, brother? The last part of this 4-part thing I have for the Cubs doing either the division or the postseason is something you did touch on. And the guy that I highlighted when I wrote this up would have been Dansby Swanson. I said it's clutch hitting. I said they need to be able to perform in big moments, particularly when younger hitters are stepping up, especially if the younger hitters can step up in crunch time. A player like Dansby Swanson could be a leader in the clubhouse, teach these young guys, and play a huge role in these moments. Now, we just talked about Dansby Swanson a few minutes ago. I think not only Dansby Swanson being a clutch hitter, but maybe a guy who we're kind of losing faith in his bat, Nico Horner, a guy like Seiya Suzuki, because Kyle, we watched a lot of Cubs games together, and we knew last year 1,000,000% when the Cubs loaded the bases, they weren't scoring a freaking run. If they had no outs, 1 out,
Yeah,
or 2
situational
outs.
hitting. Situational hitting. The Cubs have had a problem with situational hitting for it's been 4 or 5 years now, man.
Yep.
I think at one point in the last 4 or 5 years, I think one of those teams was the worst team in baseball history at getting guys home from third with 1 or 0 outs. So you're talking about just make contact, sack fly, hard hit ball to up the middle, anything to put somebody out of position. And the Cubs couldn't do it. I mean, I do expect that to change with the likes of Kyle Tucker and I still think Michael Busch has not reached his ceiling. I think he's going to get a lot better. I think Michael Busch is not going to be one of the best Cubs at some point in his career. The more comfortable he gets with those left-handed pitchers. I mean, guys, let's face it. When you're going from the minors to the majors in baseball, it's tough, man. You're talking about going from guys who average, 88 to 92 miles an hour to go to the majors where everybody's throwing 100. Yeah. It's just a different game. You have to adjust your swing. I think he's capable of doing that. I think he's a very smart guy. I think he's ultimately going to do that. But yeah, Sean, Dansby Swanson, and I hate to say this, Cubs fans, so don't hate me, but this is starting to feel very Jason Hayward-ish. I mean, This is a guy who you paid the most money of anybody on this roster. It's a very similar contract. If you look at the two contracts, I think they were both 7 years. I think they were both somewhere around $180 million, correct?
I think it was 171. Yeah.
When Jason Hayward kept year in, year out, was inconsistent as a hitter, you know what they kept saying? Well, he's a leader. He's a captain. He's a leader in the clubhouse. He's teaching. That's what the same stuff they're saying about Swanson. No, I don't want to hear that shit anymore. I want to see Dansby Swanson hit a minimum of 250 minimum. And I don't think that's asking a lot, Sean.
No, and
I don't think 250 is asking a lot.
The reason why I put this lineup up, because if you don't, at least when you get to the first inning or you bat around, your table setters are going to be Happ, Tucker, and Suzuki. So then you get into the guys that got to drive them in: Busch, Swanson, and Horner. Swanson and Horner haven't been those guys. And then you got Pete Crow-Armstrong, followed by Shaw and Amaya. And obviously your 7 and 8, 9 hitter, Amaya and Shaw or Armstrong, had very solid second half of the season. So you're hoping that carries over. But I understand. I hate to say it and I hate to disagree, but I think the lineup is pretty good. And I disagree with Brandon there, who said Seau's not that guy. Seau is a lifetime 280 hitter in Major League Baseball. If he can stay healthy, he is that guy. I mean,
somewhere in the middle, right? I mean, Seau's a very good player. I mean, when he's healthy,
really good. I'm going to put his splits up here.
Not a good fielder. When he's a DH, he's a very good player. But you're also, if Vernon's talking about in terms of expectations, what we were told Seiya Suzuki was going to be when the Cubs brought him in here as an international prospect. No, he's not the guy that the Cubs told us he was going to. They were talking like Seiya Suzuki was going to hit 35 bombs a year for the rest of his career in Major League Baseball. Like, he had been so seasoned and been playing baseball for so long in Japan. He was going to come over here. The adjustment wasn't going to be that tough. He was going to be a guy who could hit Major League pitching and could hit 25 to 35 bombs every year. Seiya Suzuki has not been that guy. He has not been that guy. And also, Sean, I'm pretty sure when he played Japan, he was like a highly touted defensive player. I think that they said he was like one of the best right fielders in baseball.
He won the award for best outfielder 3 years in a row.
Yeah, well, that is far gone behind. He was awful in right field last year. I see Bruce says that he's going to be playing right field today, but obviously it's spring training. And I'm sure you're going to see Seiya Suzuki. They're going to give Kyle Tucker days off, and Seiya Suzuki's probably going to fill that spot out there. But I think the least amount of Seiya Suzuki in right field as possible is a good thing for the Chicago Cubs.
Well, and I hate to say this again, man. I mean, maybe he doesn't hit the home runs, but I mean, just look at this. Last year was a 3.5 WAR player. The year before, he was a 3 WAR player. And these are at almost 600 plate appearances and 500 at bats. I mean, he had 75 runs, 74 runs in back-to-back seasons. I'm not doing 2022 because that was his fair adjustment year. And even in that adjustment year, he was still a 2 WAR baseball player. He's had 150 hits, 145 hits. He averages 30 doubles a year. He's right on the nose at 6 triples and averaged 20 home runs and 74 RBIs per year. The one thing we'd like to see drop is those strikeouts, because the strikeouts at 130, 160, and you'd like to see those walks go up from 63 and 59. And I will say this because, Kyle, we have talked about this in the past. I don't know of any Major League Baseball player that gets hosed in the strike zone more than Seiya Suzuki. They actually have made graphs about it.
Sean, it's actually Japanese players. They showed they're all in the top 10. Swan, all those guys. I don't know if it's their stance. I don't know if there's something about their stance is awkward. The umpires can't. But yeah, there was 4 or 5 Japanese players in the top 20 of getting hosed in the strike zone by major league umpires. But Sean, here's what I have to say about Seiya Suzuki, and I think this is to Brandon's point. Saying that, dude. I think Seiya Suzuki.
Before you say anything, a 3.5 WAR.
Yes.
You cannot shake a stick at that. That is unbelievable. That's really good.
Suzuki is a good player, really good player, on the cusp of being a star. When he got here, we thought he was a star on the cusp of being a superstar.
That's fair.
That's what we thought. I bought a Seiya Suzuki jersey. You were with me. I'm like, this guy is going to be that guy. He's going to be. They're gonna be like, oh, the Mets have Juan Soto and the Dodgers have Ohtani and the Cubs have Suzuki. He's not that guy. Kyle Tucker is that guy for the Chicago Cubs. But I do think that if Seiya Suzuki plays to his potential and doesn't get hurt and plays like he does when Seiya Suzuki goes into those hot streaks, he's amazing. He's one of the toughest players to beat to stop in baseball. But
drives the ball, pulls the ball.
Yeah, we just need more of it. Just needs to be more consistent.
Agree.
That's all. It's just got to be more consistent.
And that's a great way to put it, Kyle. I agree. I agree with that 100%. We did think he was a star that was going to be a superstar, but still, when I look at those numbers and say, man, a 280 batting average, a 3.5 WAR, a 3 WAR, a 280 bat. I mean, he's a lifetime 280. Hold on, let me just double check this before I stick my foot in my mouth. He's a lifetime. Where's his batting average at? 278. And that's only 285 and 283 with the Cubs, and his first year was a 262. If that was a tick up, he's a 280 hitter. Yeah, I mean, a 280 average is really good in baseball.
Well, it's all expectations. It's all expectations. Sean, if you have a guy like
I love Seiya. You know my love for Seiya Suzuki.
I think most Cubs fans like Seiya Suzuki. So let's just for instance, you got a guy like Dansby Swanson who hit 240 last year, right?
Yeah.
You're like, man, Dansby Swanson is 240. If he comes into this season, hits 270, in your head, you're like, oh my God, Dansby Swanson's amazing. He's killing it. He is like the key piece of the Chicago Cubs. He is keeping the line moving. If Seiya Suzuki's expected to hit 290 and comes in and hits that same 270, you're like, man, come on, Seiya. You got to do better than that. You got to be better. Expectations are for you to be. Here's another problem with Seiya Suzuki that I have in particular, Sean. People keep saying the Cubs need power. The Cubs lack power. The Cubs need power. I think the Cubs thought Seiya Suzuki was going to be that power. I think that's what they thought. I think they were like, we don't have to go get some big, huge home run hitter. We don't have to have Matt Mervis up here for the next 2 years. Seiya Suzuki's going to give us 30, 35 bombs. He's just not doing it. And you know what? I think if Seiya Suzuki stayed healthy for an entire season, he probably would be somewhere right around that number, 30, 35 home runs. I think personally what Brennan is saying, and I think what a lot of Cubs fans have thought about Seiya Suzuki, I think they still think the potential is there. I think in the back of their heads, people still believe that Seiya Suzuki could even hit 40 home runs in a season. I think that they think he's capable of doing that. Problem with Seiya Suzuki is when he has these major injuries or he goes on these month spans where he's not really, he's cold and he can't get hot. The defense isn't helping him. That's not helping him. Like, hey, Seiya, if you're not contributing offensively, you cannot be a handicap in right field. You can't do it. You can't be a handicap in right field.
And to your point, Kyle, getting to that 30 home runs, if he does stay healthy, the major league average for home runs for an average power hitter is 20.54. So with his injuries, if he stops missing 6 weeks, maybe he could bump that up and get to that mark. But unfortunately, he has missed 6 weeks every year he's been with the
John, I was going to say this earlier. And obviously, guys, I'm just kidding. I understand that this is not a possibility, especially with the amount of money that these guys make. But I really do think the Cubs might be better off just starting Seiya Suzuki and Jameson Taillon midway through the season. Like just bench them for the first 3 months of the season and then bring them in halfway through the season. I mean, Sean, would you let Jamison Tyon start a playoff game if he was Jamison Tyon that he is early in seasons?
No, but he started off pretty solid last year, didn't he?
That's what I'm saying. If Jamison Tyon was the same pitcher he was in the beginning of the season, come playoffs, I'd let him get a playoff start. If he's the pitcher he has been at the end of seasons, no.
I'm backing up your point. I'm running Sayas numbers as the Cub down on the bottom, and you can see they increase immensely in July, August, and September.
That's what I'm saying. If Jamison Tyon, Sean, we talked about it. He's lost what? He loses 2-3 miles per hour in his fastball, his velocity at the end of the season. If you just didn't play him for the first 2 months of the season, you're like Jamison. Everybody's season starts in March. Your season starts at the end of May, and you get that good Jamison Tyon that's still pitching high velocity late in the season, or even God forbid we say in the playoffs. He would be one of my favorite Cubs, but the problem with Jamison Tyon is he is the definition of inconsistent. He's the definition of inconsistent.
The one thing I'll say about Tyon, even though he's losing velocity, that still gives me a little hope, is I do think he's a good pitcher, and I think he knows how to pitch, so he can work around that velocity just a tad. I would obviously like to see that velocity go up. And I have not checked his velocity in the spring this year, and I highly doubt he's out there throwing 95 miles per hour right now.
Spring training for a veteran like Tyon is like
it's just right.
It's like playing catch. He's like, I don't care what happens. I don't want to see Tyon. As a matter of fact, I've said this on the podcast when we had Alex Pat on. I wanted to see the Cubs for a long stretch of the season, maybe 2-3 months, go to a 6-man rotation and give Tyon in particular some days off. Try to save that arm as much as you possibly can. A couple of guys. I think Imanaga should skip a couple starts because Japanese pitchers don't pitch as much as they do in the Major League Baseball. Man, these guys, and I know he handled it well last year. He did. But what's going to happen if he has to do it back-to-back seasons? Are we going to see the effects of that now? Later on, like what he did last year, we going to start to see the effects of that now. I mean, I think all of these guys, Steele, Tyon, and Imanaga should all get some. Well, I do more than a few starts off.
And I do think I heard it. I think it was on The Score this week. They had a guest. It could have been ESPN 1000. It could have even been Sirius Satellite Radio. I don't remember. But they were talking about Major League Baseball. Almost every team is getting ready to move to a 6-man rotation. I think the Cubs have the ability to do that. And I think that it would be very smart, especially with these guys like Javier Assad and Shota, who is another pitcher who had a problem getting through the 6th inning last year. Whether it was fatigue,
he's not used. I mean, in Shota's defense, they're not asked to pitch as much in Japan. So he comes out there. Of course, there's going to be adjustment. As a matter of fact, Imanaga was the best story for Chicago sports.
Oh God, I love Shota.
I mean. This guy, they were like, "Hey, you guys didn't get the I can't say his name. The guy who went to
Yamamoto.
Yeah, Yamamoto. Like he was like the crown jewel, you know. The Cubs were like, "Oh, sorry guys, you didn't get Yamamoto, but you got this. You got this Imanaga guy. He's pretty good. He's all right." And then he started pitching for the Cubs, and I'm like, "Pretty good. This guy's amazing. It's amazing." But I think that's why a lot of Cubs fans expect him to come back down to earth a little bit. I think that's why instead of seeing that sub-3 ERA. Cubs fans expect and Fangraphs expects him to be somewhere around what did they say, a 3.5, 3.6? Yeah. And if that happens, Sean, he's not a number 2. He's not a number 2.
I think they had him around a 344 on.
If he's pitching a 3.4, 3.5, he's not a number 2 in rotation. He's not. He's not a number. Not on a good team. Not on a good team. Not on the Dodgers. Not on the Braves. Not on the Phillies. He's not a number 2.
For me, I'm gonna stay. Like I said, I'm going to stay cautiously optimistic. I think the Cubs can pull off and split the difference between Pacoda and Fangraphs. I think they can be an 88-win team. I think they have somewhat of the right combination of pitching and defense, and hopefully they can get that offensive production. They missed out on a couple of stars like Bregman, and they did not go after Dylan Cease. And I know a lot of Cub fans feel like that's a step back, but I do think the team's core, especially with Suzuki and Tucker, and hopefully Swanson having a bounce back here.
Oh,
I'm
God.
saying that cautiously.
I'm telling you, this is Jason Hayward conversation all over again.
Well, I hope not. I hope not.
I know, but
you
Sean, did we do this every year? We did this every year. Every year when
But-
Jason Hayward was in Chicago, we're like, hey, maybe Jason Hayward will be the Atlanta Braves Jason Hayward and hit 27 bombs. Yet that guy never came back. That was the exception to the rule. What Jason Hayward did in Atlanta was the exception to the rule. Jason Hayward was the guy he
don't
was
agree.
on the Cubs. That's
But
who he was.
You do have to maintain hope, Kyle, that PCA and Amaya can continue to develop up their strong second half and their swing adjustments.
PCA and Amaya are not my concern.
Okay.
We've talked about this. My concern are the guys, Sean, who have been here and are supposed to be the pillars of the Cubs. Nico Horner, Dansby Swanson, Seiya Suzuki staying healthy. These are the guys that need to be. And Ian Happ. Ian Happ was the best Cub last year. You guys, he had the worst first 2 months of baseball I've ever seen, and he ended up being the best Cub last year. That can't happen. Like, Ian, you are a guy. The Cubs signed all three of these guys to long-term, or to the two of them to 3-year contracts. Obviously, Dansby Swanson to a 7-year contract. They are leaning on you guys to take this team out of a rut. Yeah, they're supposed to be the run stoppers. Hey, we're in a rut. Our offense isn't hitting well. You guys need to go in there and change this. Go turn it around. They're supposed to be the guy who, when the other team's on a 14-0 run in basketball, you go score a layup and shut the crowd up, right? That's who these guys are supposed to be, and they're not doing it. And it's time that they do it, because I'm not going to – there's too many similarities with Swanson and Hayward, the Braves background, coming over here, expected to hit 20 home runs. They're falling short. Their average is down. But they're great leaders in the clubhouse, and they're really good, fun guys to hang out with. I don't care. I'm a Cubs fan. I don't hang out with – if Dansby Swanson wants to come to my house and hang out, sure, then maybe I'll change. But right now I watch him on TV, and he needs to be better. The Cubs need to expect more from him, and he needs to be better.
I will say this. I do think excuse me. Sorry. My wife just texted me. I had to respond there really quick. I think they absolutely have the talent to win this division. And I think that they're going to have to add a couple of pieces at the trade deadline if they want to make a deep postseason run and reach that NLCS. But the one thing I am going to say is I think it's going to be a fun and amazing season to watch as PCA and Amaya and hopefully Mr. Shaw continue to develop and raise our Cub fans' hopes for the future.
Yeah, and Cubs fans, as two diehard Cubs fans here, and you guys, obviously, we're not saying we know more than anybody else, but Sean and I watch every single game. I mean, I watch almost every single Cubs game every year. I love this team. You cut me, I bleed red and blue. The Cubs and Bears are very close to me. Let me tell you, Cubs fans, I know that he's 0 for 17 or something in spring training. This is the same conversation we had about Cody Bellinger 2 years ago. He ended up being the Cubs MVP that season. Don't worry about Kyle Tucker. Kyle Tucker is going to be just fine. He's going to do exactly what they brought him here to do. It's the guys around him in that lineup that the Cubs need to really Cubs fans need to keep an eye on. I think another guy who could be really big for this lineup and be consistent, I think he could be the most consistent player outside of Kyle Tucker, is Michael Busch. I think Michael Busch, you know exactly what you're going to get from him every single game, and he's going to show up every single game. He's going to work hard. He puts the work in, and he's going to – I think Michael Busch is capable of hitting 30 home runs.
Yeah, I agree. I agree 100%. And as I say that, can you see that? Yeah. I'm rocking Michael Busch right now. I bought this jersey last April. I thought it was a great trade when the Cubs got him. His bio was fantastic. His makeup was everything I read about this guy was fantastic. And I'll say for his rookie season, he did not disappoint last year. He does have to build on that, because I do want to see him be a 20-25 home run guy out of first base for the Chicago Cubs. And I think he has that potential and ability to hit for some power. And I'm just praying. I'm going to stay cautiously optimistic. I do believe the Cubs are going to win the Central. I'm going to stick by. I don't think the Brewers, contrary to some people's belief in the comments, are going to be able to continue their patchwork. They do have some stars. They lost some pitching. They lost their closer. Let's see what happens.
No, man, the Brewers
Let's see what happens.
They're just that team. They're going to bring in some pitchers nobody's ever heard of in the history of the world. This guy's going to be a guy who wasn't even drafted, probably played college for like 3 weeks and then got hurt. And he's going to come to the Brewers and have a .82 ERA and be the best pitcher in baseball. That's just, it's lately the Brewers have been that team of luck. They have. They've been the team of luck. And Sean,
they have, but sometimes luck runs out, baby.
100%. And saying the Cubs are going to win the NL Central, that's not a very high bar to. I mean, the Cubs should be able to do. They're the Chicago Cubs. We are the Chicago Cubs. We should be winning this division every year. They should be just like the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Braves. We're the Chicago Cubs. We should be winning this division every single year. It's a bunch of small market teams, and then the Chicago Cubs. Like, we should win this division every single year.
I don't. Well, the Cardinals should be our main battle.
Yeah, well, and the Cardinals, Sean, like you said, luck runs out, and it seems like the Cardinals have fallen
finally
on a stretch of bad luck here. But I expect them to come back around. So if you're going to do it, do it now.
And I will say this: I didn't get to my nugget and tidbit, but I'm going to get it before we get out of here and wrap this show up. The nugget of the week: Mr. Jake Arrieta turned 39 this past March 6th. And he currently still holds the Cubs' postseason record for 66 strikeouts. That is a franchise record, for the Cubs. I didn't really get a chance to get any awesome nuggets and tidbits, but he also.
The picture's starting to break up a little bit here, so we can get out of here. But I want to ask you one more question before we get out of here, because I had a long conversation with the guy at the bar the other day about this. I said, right now, if anybody in Chicago sports deserves a statue outside of the stadium, a new statue for a new athlete, I think John Lester would be the guy that I would choose. The guy at the bar said, I would argue that Jake Arrieta was more important to the Chicago Cubs than John Lester. Whoa. He deserves that statue outside of Wrigley Field. I could not for the life of me create an argument that could prove him wrong.
I'll say this: Jake Arrieta was very important, but if John Lester isn't the lead in that rotation, the Cubs are not the same.
But if you look at the statistics, Jake Arrieta was better.
I have no doubt about that.
Yeah, he was.
But when you talk about the guy that needed to be here,
the tone setter, right? John Lester was that's the argument I'm going to say. Hey, listen, man, I think everybody fed off of John Lester.
100%. John Lester, the Cubs don't win the World Series if John Lester isn't a part of this team, and I believe that firmly.
That was Theo Epstein's first move. Yeah. He was like, hey, if we're going to do this, we need John Lester. Let's go get
John Lester, go look at his postseason. You could say whatever you want about his starts during the regular season. The guy's one of the most dominant postseason pitchers in baseball history. The Cubs don't do what they did without him, and Jake Arrieta, humongous part of it. Huge.
The fact that one of those, Sean, this is the first time the Cubs win a World Series in 116 years, something like that, 108 years. One of those guys needs a statue outside of Wrigley. Somebody on that team needs a statue.
Can I put it this way? I don't think and I know Jake Arrieta was huge, and this could be an argument for a different day. But go look at Kyle Hendricks' season that year. The Cubs don't get there without Kyle Hendricks. And Kyle Hendricks, the guy was dominant. Nobody can hit this guy.
Yeah. I love Hendricks. I love Hendricks. I do think, though, that Jake Arrieta had the best 52-inning stretch of any pitcher in the history of baseball. I will say this, though. If the Cubs do decide to pick one of these guys to give a statue to, don't let the guy who made the Dwayne Wade statue make the statue for whoever it is.
I'll give you who deserves the statue right now. You ready? 1, 2, 3. Yeah. That's my guy. He needs a statue.
I was talking to a woman at the bar last night, and she told me her and her husband met Anthony Rizzo, and he was not a nice guy. I'm like, really? I have never heard anything but the opposite about Anthony Rizzo. He was a cancer survivor. This is a guy who does a ton of charity work, a ton of work in the community. He seems like a very playful, happy-go-lucky. He loves baseball, loves to be out there kind of guy. I don't know if I believe. Maybe he was just having a bad day. I don't know.
Here, I'll tell you this, Kyle, because we had this similar conversation about one gentleman, and it rubbed me the wrong way. And he seems as the kindest gentleman ever, does a ton of charity work. And our co-host on Wednesdays, Jay Podolko, was with me when I met one Greg Olson. And I turned around after we got that autograph, and I looked at Jay, and I was like, what an asshole. Like, he wouldn't look at us. I asked him questions. I was like, hey, man, how's your day going? How you like being a bear? He grunted at me, had his head down, and we walked away. I looked at Jay. I'm like, God, what a dick. Like, he wouldn't even talk to me. So,
everybody has bad days. I met Chris Chelios once, and he was very cold, but people have bad days, man. You never know. We have them. You have them. I have them. There's days where I'm like, man, I'm not talking to Sean today. KU lost. I'm not talking to him for like 2 hours.
I'll tell you this. I met Chris Chelios out across the street from the firehouse after a Cubs game, and he not only signed my Chicago Cubs hat, he sat there and talked to me on the street for about 10 minutes, and we carried on a conversation. One of the nicest sports athletes in Chicago I've ever met. So that he was – everyone has bad days, man. And I'll tell you this, as you mentioned that, if Kansas loses for the first time on Senior Day today since 1984, that bill at the Barbecue King is going to be really big.
Well, guys, it's probably time for us to wrap it up and get out of here. Real quick, to everybody watching on Twitter, please go over to our YouTube page, 4-Star Chicago Sports. Please like and subscribe. We appreciate you guys watching. Appreciate everybody in the comments today. Breaking news, Bruce, Vernon Duplessis, Scott Angel, Ant Mass, Elizabeth, everybody who joined the show today. We really, really, really appreciate you guys. Please keep an eye out for you guys. Monday is going to be a really big day on the 4-Star Chicago Sports podcast. We're going to talk about the tampering period. I'm sure we're probably going to have an idea where the Bears are going in free agency. It's going to be a really interesting show, a lot of great content. And then Wednesday's show, the Barely There podcast with Sean and I, will be the day of free agency, and you will see who they sign. And Sean and I will break down all these players for you guys. But please continue to tune in. We've talked about it for the last couple of weeks. There's going to be a major overhaul at 4-Star Chicago Sports. There's going to be a lot more content out there. Easier for people to get in contact with us. Give us a chance to get to know you guys better. Keep an eye out for that. Sean, anything else you want to say before we get out of here?
I think Drew Dahlman's a bear.
It's sounding like I've read 3 articles yesterday that are, by all accounts, I mean, whispers are going around somewhere in the league that the Chicago Bears are going to make a valiant effort to sign Drew Dahlman.
And by the time we get on the air Monday, we should have a pretty good idea. So, until then, everybody, bear down. Let's go Cubs and rock chalk Jayhawk. Let's go.
What, John? You know what time the Cubs game's on?
The Cubs are on at 2:05 today.
2:05, guys. Keep an eye. It's the closer you get to the regular season, which is 10 days away now, you're going to start to see the roster, the spring training roster, look more like the major league roster. So, if you got nothing to do today, Marquee Network, check it out, guys.
Absolutely, love y'all. Peace and love, and stay safe out there. Until next time, peace.